Shit happens. Bad shit, good shit, crazy shit, and it usually happens when we least expect it. So tune into the Shit That Happens to Me podcast and hear me and everyone I meet tell their shitty stories. You'll laugh, you'll cry. You probably won't cry. Why would you cry? These are mostly funny stories. You'll learn a few lessons. Probably not. It's definitely not that kind of podcast. But you will have a great time. Honestly, you can't make this shit up. Hi, everyone. Welcome to another episode of the Shit That Happens to Me podcast. Today's episode is dedicated to Allison Phillips, Katie Beth, and everyone from the Edge Podcast Network here in Milwaukee. Allison and Katie Beth gave me my first shot as a podcaster, and I am forever grateful to Edge and all of them there. They're closed now, and my podcast now has a new home, Straw Hut Media. Straw Hut is a California-based company with numerous interesting and humorous podcasts. You should totally check them out. I'm really looking forward to working with them and this next stage in my podcasting adventure. So for my inaugural episode with Straw Hut, I have a very special guest today, my husband, Steve. Hi, Steve.
Oh, great to be back for an encore performance.
Yes. Well, I'm wondering why you're back today. Do you know why you're back today?
Well, so by my count, I was part of the Valentine's Day special about in the first year with the ensemble cast. And then I shared with your community my experiences as a vendor at County Stadium during Packer and Milwaukee Brewer games. And I told the tale of the underground city, which seemed to capture the imagination of not only people in my family, but your longtime friend, the great Glenn Garfinkel. Why don't you tell us about Glenn?
Hi, Glenn. Well, everybody knows about Glenn already. So Glenn was the boy I loved in high school, and we've just remained friends ever since. And I talked to him not that long ago, and Glenn listens to every episode, including the episode where there was a trigger warning for all of the straight white men in the audience. But he said he only has one comment for the podcast. And I said, what's that? And he said, more Steve. So Glenn, the episode's also dedicated to you because here you have more of my husband, Steve.
Yeah. And, you asked me to do this, and I spent over 30 years fascinating you with my tall tales, mostly embellished tales of my life growing up on the west side of Milwaukee. So it put some pressure on me. Number one, I want to have some fresh new material, keep things spiced up for the marriage, and also give some insight into my journey with pickling to your loyal followers. So, typically, and you've lived through this for many years, I typically dive into a very intricate, way too detailed, lengthy, and boring story. And I thought, let's mix that up today, right? Let's start at the end first. Let's give everybody the punchline. So here's the punchline, honey. The 2021 Pickles were the best ever. Okay. And I know you've had your own journey with Nye Pickles. And when you first came into the family, you weren't fond of them. And then your fondness grew over the years and really probably reached a height when you went through your life changes. And so what are your thoughts? What are your thoughts on being on this, pickling journey with me?
Wait, can we go back to my life changes for just a second? I mean, I guess it's not a secret because everyone knows I have a drink and then I start fanning myself about 10 minutes in, which must be related to my life changes. But Um, yeah, I was a little weird having you announce that. But anyway, so I think that pickling is fascinating, and it goes back so many years, even though you're starting at the end. And I think people really would enjoy hearing some of these stories. But I just want to know, like, what makes a great pickle? Like you said, this is the greatest year of all. So what makes a great pickle, dear?
I, I have an answer to that. And the
Okay.
answer is it's different for everybody. So as you know, my mother Nessie, who really was the matriarch of this pickling empire, she loved her pickles very early on, like 3 days after they were fermenting. And I would beg her, I would say, Mom, please wait a few weeks. She loved them really early on. Your son Jesse, the great Jesse Nye, likes his pickles half and half and crunchy. And as you have followed this whole pickling journey, the pickles mature. You know, early on after they ferment, they're maybe half and half and crunchy, and then they begin to become very sour as they mature. These are kosher style sour dill pickles. I mean, by the end, by our last jar, it's like eating sweet tarts. They're so sour. Um, your older son, Zach Nye, loves really sour, full-bodied pickles like the ones my grandmother made. The thing about Steve Nye is I love him in the beginning, I love him in the middle, and I love him in the end. I love the classics, the hot and spicy. I love the bread and butter. I love the dill
Can you say
tomatoes.
can you say more about these different kinds of pickles that you make? Like, no, I don't think people know, like, what's a classic, what's a hot and spicy. What's the difference in those pickles?
So here's the thing. This is not, from what I understand, an episode on pickle making. This is an episode on the shit that happens when you make pickles. I'm willing to open the kimono a little bit. Okay, I'm going to show you a little ankle, maybe a little knee, but honey, I am not opening up the kimono the whole
No,
way. So let me just
we
tell
don't
you,
expect a pickle lesson, but people might need a little background.
the classic Nye pickles came from Russia via my grandmother, Hilda Talmasky. Actually, making dill pickles are very simple. There's very few ingredients. You have your pickles, you have your dill, you have your pickle spice, you have your kosher salt. So as my mother would say, we don't get botulism. You have your garlic and you have your water. That's really it. And then you close the lid and you let them do their thing. They ferment. Because when the pickles come from the field, the skin is covered with a lactobacillus. And so while I hand wash them gently and have a relationship with each pickle, some people put their pickles in the wash machine. You don't want to do that. You need those little lactobacillus doing their thing. They ignite the fermentation. And it's interesting because when I make the dill tomatoes from the Nye garden, you know, so we pick the green tomatoes and dill those, it takes them much, much longer. So there must not be as much lactobacillus on them, and the skin is also much thicker. So it takes, whereas it might take 2 weeks to open the first jar of Nye pickles, it takes 3 months before we open a jar of Nye tomatoes. Now, so we started, you know, I started my own personal journey in what I call the modern era of Nye pickling. And what is the modern era of Nye pickling? This was the day that it was in the mid 90s. It's somewhere between 1995 and 2000. I don't recollect the exact year. But my dad drove up the driveway, called me out for a father-son meeting, and he handed me over all the jars, the pickling jars, cases of pickling jars. And he says, you know, you're the man. He passed the baton to me on that day. And that is when the modern era began, when we started doing all the pickling at our house.
Previous to that, you had been doing it with your parents and your grandparents?
Yes. And so it all started for me. My first recollection, I was probably 1965. And, I have these memories of going to the Bacher farm. This was a family of farmers, and they had pickle fields. And this was, on the west side of Milwaukee, and I loved going to this place. It was like going to a festival of pickles. You drove in, and there were always so many people there. We usually went with my grandparents, Joe and Hilda Talmosky, and my Aunt Bernice Gollop, and probably my cousin Deborah. And we all went to pick up pickles. And the pickles were in bushels. And they were in bushels because that's how they counted the pickles and what size you wanted. My mom and Bernice always wanted the 800 size. What did that mean? That meant 800 pickles per bushel, which translates in the modern era to about 2 to 2.5 inches in size. Okay. And so that was always like, for me, it was like going to Disney World. Oh man, we're going to the Bacher farm. And, the key to pickling is everything's got to be fresh, right? Your pickles have to be, you got to go from field to jar, and the dill has to be just perfect. Okay. And then your pickle spice, of course. But the whole key is to, once you decide it's go time, you finish the job. And I think what I've brought, to the table is my dad passed the baton to a PhD from Northwestern University, where I actually measure and quantitate things, right? And so, whereas my mom would say some of this and some of that, and they had this spoon from Russia, this spoon,
you still
which
have
I don't
this
even
spoon,
know.
Steve.
Right.
You still
But
have
I think
spoon.
what we brought to this endeavor is the science of pickling, right? And I'm not sure, when the science of pickling became the art of pickling, because I would say right now I'm an artisan pickler, right? Which for some people means you can just charge more money. But somewhere along the line, I went from the young lad who cut garlic to beginning the modern era, bringing science into it, and now being the old artisan pickle maker. So let's go back now that we've told the punchline, yes, this is the greatest year ever of Nye Pickles. And you know what's funny about that? My advisor from Northwestern, Dr. Richard Scarpula, always used to say to me, Steve, you're only as good as your last DNA prep. And when the 2021 pickles emerged, and I remember taking a jar over to my cousin Howie's house, because Howie has had these pickles for longer than me, probably 60 years. Who else to judge whether this is the greatest year or not? I went over to Howie's house and I gave him a jar early on, and he said to me, his words were, "This could be the year." And then I went there about 3 weeks ago because I opened a jar and I was like, oh my God, this is it. I went over to Howie's house and we sat in his kitchen. He opened the jar, and as usual, he smelled the bouquet, and he bit into the pickle, and it was so crunchy. And he looked at me and said, "These are the best ever." So according to the great Dr. Richard Scarpula, if I'm only as good as my last DNA prep, should I make another batch of Nye Pickles? Because, honey, I don't know. I don't know if I can do better than what I've done.
You mean you're only as good as your last pickle then? So,
right.
So there's this need to keep topping, to keep doing better and better with the pickles. I hear.
Well, but it's also understanding, what's going on with the pickles. Because remember, the 2020s, as far as I'm concerned, were a disappointment. Every jar was different. Some of the pickles were softer than we like.
So,
I didn't think
so
the taste was that great.
yeah.
So
So
this is
that's part of
when,
what makes them. Can I get a word in? Can I say something, please, honey? That what makes a pickle great is also like you don't want to bite into a soft pickle. Like you want to hear that when you bite into it, right? I mean, no one wants a
but
soft pickle.
but also,
And the flavor also. Like it's got to be bursting with flavor.
bursting with flavor, but no aftertaste. So I'll tell you why I haven't had a Vlasic or Milwaukee dill pickle in 25 years is this lingering, awful aftertaste. There's a Yiddish expression, fat, and that's fat. I'm disgusted by that. So even when I go to a restaurant and order a sandwich and they give me a pickle slice, I can't eat that pickle slice because it'll ruin my sandwich.
Fat.
The pickle is supposed to accentuate the sandwich, right? Not bring it down. So what I think
pickles actually bubble in your mouth.
Yeah, my cousin Alex calls them the fizzy pickles because they're so alive. They're packed so fresh. They fermented perfectly, and these pickles are also great on sandwiches. As I said, they accentuate the sandwich, right? So, what kind of sandwich are they perfect on? Of course, a tuna sandwich, right? You have some nice challah bread or marble rye or a Kaiser. Put in some tuna, put a thinly sliced layer of nye pickles, lettuce, tomato. That's like an $8.95 sandwich.
Yes.
You know what else I used to love it on? I used to love it on chopped liver, but because I went to graduate school and learned what the liver does, I don't eat chopped liver anymore, which is why I want to begin to explore the vegetarian liver.
Okay. So
let me go back.
I want to ask you, this is an interview, dear. I want to ask you about some of the shit that's happened to you during pickling. You've had some I can think of a very interesting. I can think of two interesting things that have happened to you during pickling. So, would you like to tell some of those stories?
I would love to share. I want to just go back to my beginning.
Okay.
And try.
It's only an hour podcast. Go ahead.
We might have to divide it into 2 or 3. It could be like a limited series like they have on Netflix. Anyhow, so I grew up on the west side of Milwaukee on Grand Tosa. And these were relatively small houses. And in these houses, they usually had the wash machine and dryer in the basement. So instead of carrying your laundry downstairs, they had clothes chutes. Do you know what these are? Did you have these?
I didn't have one growing up, but I know what it is. Yeah.
You open a drawer, a little door, and put your dirty clothes in there, and it goes down into the basement into this like cloth like thing with a zipper. And when you have filled that up, which it always got clogged, by the way, in the clothes chute, and you had to take like a broom and unclog it. But this thing would, towards the end of the week, would be a bulging bag of dirty clothes, and then you unzipped it, and it came through. You sorted it and did your wash. So, as a young lad, my parents would make the pickles down in the basement, not in the dining room where we make ours. It would be in the basement of the house. My dad would wash the pickles by hand it was like this concrete wash basin. And so when I was brought onto the team, they said, Steve, you'll start out on garlic, which is where everybody starts and nobody wants to be because your hands reek for a week with garlic. And they made my garlic cutting station under the laundry chute, under the bulging bag of clothes, gave me a sharp knife. So I sat there cutting garlic, looking at this bulging, hoping it wouldn't open on me. But that's how I had my beginning, cutting garlic.
I didn't know that.
And it was, it took a while. It was a few years before I graduated to cutting dill. But eventually I made it to dill. And then when we entered the modern era at our house, my dad would still put remember the lids on the jars, boil the lids and put them on. And I would assist him with that. And then eventually, that's where I am now. So everybody has a role. It's teamwork.
Yes.
Teamwork.
So
you want to know about some of the things that have happened over the years, because Steve, the artisan pickle maker, makes it sound so easy, but really it's not. Now let me just say what's really important. An important ingredient in all of this is your farmer. You got to get to know your farmer. And that is a very, very important relationship. And I started with the Bakkers, right? And the Bakkers eventually went out of business. They sold their land to developments. And I remember the last year that they were open, it was pick your own. Okay.
I don't remember that. I wasn't there, honey.
You were, because on this day I was assigned to pick up Zach from soccer practice, and I had to go to the field, right? It's like 95 degrees out, and I go out in the field to pick pickles, and, you want to pick them to be about a reasonable size. You want 800s, right?
800s.
I'm out there in 95-degree weather picking anything I see. I've got 400s and I've got 1200s. I've got it all. And I go back, I'm drenched in sweat, and I've got this timeline to pick up Zach, and I go to pay for my pickles. And I said, I would like 3 bunches of dill. And she goes, well, we don't have that. I said, no, I'm sorry. I can't make dill pickles without dill. And she goes, it's out there. And I said, in the field? And she hands me a scythe. It's one of these long knives. She goes, here, go cut your dill. Right. So, I'm a molecular biologist with a degree from Northwestern. When was the last time I went to the field and I'm cutting dill like this, but I'm on a timeline, and the legacy of Nye Pickles is relying on me. So I drive our Accord. Remember our Burgundy Accord, our first car that we had together? I drive it out into the field. It's not a 4-wheel drive thing, but I'm out in the middle of the dill field with my Accord and my scythe, cutting dill, right? And I'm piling it up on the hood. Video. I'm piling it up on the hood of the car, and I drive out. I've got my dill. I actually make it to Zach's practice, pick him up in time. So for God forbid I'd be 5 minutes late. And the hero, I've been out in the field. I've got the dill that I personally cut. We come to our house. My parents meet us. You remember what my mom said when she looked at the pickles? I can't work with these pickles. Yeah, well, this is what I got. That's what I had to work with. So that was, I didn't realize it at the time, but that was like the first shit that happened to me, was my mom telling the warrior.
Rejecting the pickles. Yeah.
I want to share a story you've heard many times, and I don't even need to embellish this one. So this was in 2015. These are the one-eyed pickles made on July 19th. Why is that date so memorable?
Can I say something about this? I just need to say one thing before you tell the story, so that people understand. It's not like you can say, oh, I'm going to pick up the pickles next week, Tuesday. The farmer calls and says the pickles are ready. You basically have a day to get them. And so our whole summer revolves around being available for these pickles. So we have lives, we work, we go on vacation, we have kids, we do stuff. And then all of a sudden the farmer calls and says the pickles are ready. And we all have to drop everything for the warrior and his pickles. Okay. So go back to July. because that's relevant to the story, right?
You brought up a beautiful point, and I just want to just make a fine tune what you said. Whereas your life, your summer, Stacey's summer revolves around Pickles. My whole year revolves around Pickles. In fact, my whole generation revolves around pickle making. So I want to just really share with you what happened here, because I think it really points to what you're saying about you order your pickles, it's go or no go. And in the history of Nye Pickles, there's never been a no go. And frankly, dear, it's not going to happen. It's not going to happen with me at the helm. Fine. So July 19th, 2015 is the one I pickled. Farmer Bud, I get the call. Steve Nye, your order of 2,000 pickles are ready. They will be ready that morning. They give you a couple days.
2,000 pickles.
2,000 pickles.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
They will be ready on the morning of July 19th. Okay. So then we begin to assemble, the dining room, get everything all set up. And on July 27th, I went for a bike ride, as I normally do, a training ride out in beautiful Mequon. And I'm on Range Line Road, going right, same road I always go on, and pow, I get hit in the eye right here. Now I've got my helmet on and my sunglasses. There's like this much room, this much opportunity to get hit. And I've been hit before. Lots of gnats and flies have bounced off me, but this thing was like, pow. And I was like, whoa, what is that? And I decided to do what I normally would. I completed the ride, which was maybe 25, 30 miles. And I was feeling good. My eye hurt a little bit, stung by something. And if you've ever been stung by a hornet, you get stung and there's this pointed pain, and it's intense and sharp, and then it goes away. Fine. So that evening, which would be the evening of July 18th, was a historic day in Wisconsin sports history. That was when Brett Favre returned to Lambeau, right? And he was coming back. He was going into the Packer Hall of Fame, and you could buy for $4 a seat at Lambeau. So I went with Jesse and my brother Eric to Lambeau, and our hero, Brett Favre, returned, and I was shook. But it's very hot and sunny that day, so I was wearing my sunglasses once again. But at the end of the event, on the way to the car, I took my sunglasses off, and Jesse said, "Dad, what is going on with your eye?" And I was like, "I don't know." And then when I got in the car, I looked in the mirror, and it was all like starting to be inflamed. And I was like, I think I was stung by a hornet. Fine. Mm-hmm. You're in Door County, right? I'm here. And I think actually Zach was up at camp, right? I think he was up at camp. And so I wake up in the morning at dawn to make final preparations. I was going to go get the pickles at 9 o'clock because it's about an 8-minute ride over to Farmer Bud. So I'm getting everything all ready, and I wake up and look in the mirror, and my eye is shut. And this became a decision point. Do I want the legacy of Nye Pickles to continue, or should I go to the ER? And so I ruminated over this for a little bit and decided
probably not.
We are going to make the pickles, but now
pickling must go on.
I'm on my own to make 2,000 jars, right? And so with that size...
No, not 2,000 jars, 2,000 pickles.
2,000 pickles. Wait, let me do a quick calculation.
I was in Door County.
Right. And Bud, Farmer Bud had about 12 pickles a jar. So we're looking at...
He's doing a calculation in the middle of the podcast. Steve,
we're looking at roughly 100
in a podcast.
We're looking at roughly 167 quarts that I would have to do until you got back from Door County to help, right? But you were so involved with this
art project
with Jill that you didn't make it back until the very end. But you did help me put the lids on, which was significant when you were doing 166 jars. Mm-hmm. So you came in, looked at the eye. We had no time, put the lids on, and we completed it, sealed the last jar. And I looked at you and I said, please take me to the ER. Right. And so we went to the ER. You remember what the doctor said to me when I walked in?
I think you took yourself to the ER, actually. But
no, you went with me. Yeah. You went with me because we put the jars on and you took me there.
What have you been doing all day? Why didn't you
That's
come
what he
sooner?
said.
Yeah.
I said, I've been pickling. And he gave me the most weird look. You've been pickling? I said, yes, I had to make my dill pickles today. So that was, it took weeks for that eye to, they gave me medicine and it took weeks for that thing to heal.
It was like, like a big, ball on your eye. Your eye was swollen shut. I have pictures from that year and of you pickling because I take pictures every year and your eye is swollen shut. Are
they in here?
Yes. What you got there?
It's probably in here. This is the pickling book that you made me. It's basically a history of Nye pickles.
It's an homage to you and the Nye pickles.
Here. You can see my right eye.
Eye is swollen. Yes.
Right.
And I'm also wondering what you're wearing. What are you wearing today? What's that T-shirt say?
Yes. Can you read it?
Does it say Steve Nye the Pickle Guy?
It says if it doesn't say Nye, it's not a pickle.
Yes.
And then on the back it says, can you read that?
You can't see that. No, It's too high up.
It says Steve Nye the Pickle Guy. Now it would say Steve Nye the Artisan Pickle Guy. Let me tell you another story. Story that I had. It happened with one of my students, Dave Branovan. And Dave came to one of my pickling workshops one Saturday afternoon to make pickles. And the reason he was interested is that his father, Mr. Branovan, made pickles, and Dave wanted to learn to make these pickles. He had a craving for them. So he came over and I showed him how it's made. Now, in the lab, right, I used to show this one student how to make DNA. And there's a series of steps you have to take. You have to go from 1 to 30 in order, and then you're done, and your DNA is good, right? And this student could never seem to go in order, right? He couldn't make his DNA. And so I think I encountered that with Dave Brandon. I showed him all the steps, right? Side by side. It's almost like I moved his hand in certain ways. I wanted him to watch how the artisan pickle maker actually, handled things, how you cradle a jar, things like that, everything. Mm-hmm. So it turns out that in the lid that you place on the jar when you're canning, there's a rubber gasket, let's call it. And when you're heating up the lid for any 5 seconds, you're basically melting that rubber gasket so that when you put it on the jar, it seals it. It turns out a few years back, the manufacturers made it that rubber gasket that is a thin layer. They made it BPA free. So if you over tighten the jar, right, what happens during fermentation, there's a lot of gas generated and that jar is under heavy pressure. I mean, you've seen over the years, there are some jars where we open them and the lids fly off. It's under pressure. What happens is when they changed that, if you tightened the lid too much, it will kink the lid. So kinking the lid seems to send to people a signal, right, that it's botulism. Okay. Mm-hmm. You look at that lid and you're like, oh, don't eat that. It'll be botulism. And my mom put in way too much salt because she was afraid of botulism. So Marie Branovan, Dave's wife, sees the kink lids. It's like, it's botulism. So he throws out all of his pickles, dozens of jars of pickles. I said, Dave, you tightened the lids too much. They kinked. That's the kind of shit that happened to my student.
So I just want to clarify that you really don't lead official workshops. And although you might have people come and help or learn, like my students actually did come. My grad students came one year and helped. This is the embellishment, I think, that you're still really good at by calling these workshops.
So you're very supportive of me, and I thank you for that. I just want to tell all the people that, yes, I do have workshops, because I knew you would challenge me on this. So I just wanted to announce to everybody, fundamental.
You're going to teach workshops now?
2 workshops. Fundamentals of Pickling 101 will be on July 26th. Advanced Pickling 201 will be on August 3rd. So what we're going to do in Fundamentals of Pickling, it's going to be the basics. I'll have everything all put together like I did with Dave.
Wait, where is this going to be?
It'll be in our dining room.
Are you inviting hundreds of people to our house to learn how to pickle, dear?
Because
they'll come.
Limited, and all registration fees go to charity. So the Fundamentals of Pickling is an intro course. And I'll have everything all there. In Fundamentals of Pickling, the students will actually experience the whole thing and get to take a jar home. What's exciting about Advanced Pickling, that's a 200 level course, is I'm going to take my students to the farm.
Oh.
Okay. I'm going to have them learn from Farmer Gary all about dill. So as we know, my farmer Gary is the guru of dill, and I ask him to teach my students about dill as he taught me. And we're going to go out to the garden and we're going to pick green tomatoes and make dill tomatoes. And most importantly, I'm going to show them the secret to the hot and spicy pickles. They'll go out and pick some of the Nye hot peppers. So those are 2 course offerings that will be happening this summer. And people can contact me through the shit that happens if they would like to register.
It's the shit that happens to me at gmail.com. But
can I proceed? Can I proceed?
Yes.
To a couple more?
Yeah.
Do we have time?
Yeah.
Okay.
We have a little bit of time.
I've got more shit here. So
it might have to be a limited series.
Right. Do you know that? Remember the year where we had Rebecca, my niece Rebecca, the great Rebecca Nye, who's now in medical school. She's very observant. We were putting the lids on the jars a few years ago, and she noticed a little caterpillar on the dill, which led to all kinds of shrieks and hysteria. And it turns out that there is a black swallowtail butterfly that loves dill, and that was a larvae to that to the dill. And I think what happens is if you get the dill too early, then the caterpillars like the immature dill. And so I noticed that, and I inspect it with a magnifying glass, as you know, and I noticed that when the dill is later in the season, it's more mature, it's yellow but not brown, then there are no more caterpillars. So that's been an interesting observation over the years.
We're not going to say what year that was, because if we gave you pickles in that year, there might have been caterpillars in it.
Right, but when you think about it, nothing. The larvae would never survive in the brine anyway.
The brine,
right? There's no way. Okay, but
can I ask a question?
But you do bring up a good point, because remember that was the year that Rebecca didn't take a jar home with her. Right.
So what do you do? What do you do with all these pickles? 2,000 pickles, Steve. What do you do with all these pickles?
And that's really, that's the fate of life, because Hashem, our God, if you believe in that, came down and said, Steve, you have high blood pressure and you have to be on a low salt diet. So God comes to probably one of the world's greatest artisan pickle makers and says, you can't eat your own pickles. So here's what I do. And you know this, we give them out to our family and friends. And I think this is really, we give them to people we love. So
Yes.
it gives us the chance to connect in the fall with people we might not have seen for a while, and they are given a jar of pickles. And we have many customers that we give these out to, and we never charge anybody for them. My hope is they return the jar. When they return the jar, then they get a new jar. And I want to just shout out to Jackie Winter, who we gave a jar of pickles to, and she returned the jars loaded with brownies. And that was the first time that ever happened. And so I've been making these and handing them out. We both have for years and years, and Jackie totally got it, and that really thrilled me.
She fills it up with ratatouille one year,
right.
I think more than 1 year. Flowers, yeah. So,
and I also want to shout out to our good friend Jill Eater. Jill worked with me for about 5 years on research and development for the bread and butter pickles. And as we all know, Jill is a gourmet, and she was basically the person who tested each batch. And, that was the recipe where, if you remember, my mom had written down the ingredients, but forgot to put any amounts next to each ingredient. And so we pretty much started from scratch. But I think that the bread and butter pickles have been like the new hot surprise for all of my customers. And one of my customers, Smooth Stuart Goldenberg, he was my big brother in the fraternity. He lives in Minnesota. He loves these bread and butter pickles. And so I shipped them to him in Minnesota, which is when another catastrophe happened. So I pack up all these bread and butter pickles and some tomatoes and some hot and spicy and some classic. I get a nice package ready, and I take it over to UPS store, and I don't hear from Stuart. I'm texting him, did you get the pickles? Yeah, it takes like 2 days, right? And I pack them in ice and everything. I don't hear from him. Finally, I call the UPS store. I'm like, hey, my package never arrived. Oh, yeah. Yeah, Dr. Nye, we have it here. I'm like, why? He goes, well, something broke. So
what a wet, smelly mess that must have been.
Ooh. So they didn't even keep it in the store. They kept it out back behind the store. And they're carrying this thing in like this. And I'm like, oh. So I learned my lesson, and I've learned how to safely pack jars of pickles. My pickles have now gone across the entire continental United States, coast to coast, New York and California, Illinois, of course, to all my cousins. They've been shipped to Port Jefferson for my cousin Josh and his family on Long Island. Lots of fans throughout the state of Wisconsin. But we give them away, and I hope people know how much we love them, that they get one. So those are the shit that happens to me. I want to just explain something, and let me open the kimono a little bit. I don't want to get a draft up there, but just a little tiny bit. Because here's an important tip when eating Nye pickles, because they are full flavor. When not to eat a Nye pickle. You want to take a stab at it, Stacey?
Well, you shouldn't eat them right before going to bed.
Right. So really the cutoff is about 9 p.m. Otherwise you have nightmares. Here's a good one.
That's not a good selling point, I don't think.
Right. Before a big date, I learned this, like in high school, which was, I didn't have a lot of dates, but if I had a date, never eat a nigh pickle before going out on a date, unless the corollary is unless your date has one too, then it's okay.
Because otherwise you'll have pickle breath. Yeah.
And you should never eat nigh pickles before orthodontia. And so I have a personal experience with this one because for 10th grade, I went to Marshall High School and they had open lunch, which meant you could like walk off campus. And Marshall High School was close to Capitol Drive and they have bagel shops and whatever. But my orthodontist, Dr. Gertler, was not far away. So of course my mom booked me to go see the orthodontist during my open lunch. And I wasn't real fond of the technician. And so if she was like mean to me the session before, I would eat the dill pickles before going to see her. And wow, boy, wow. And she just tightened those wires, a couple extra ones to get me back for this. So I had a real love-hate relationship with her, but my only ammunition was the nigh pickles.
The pickle. Yeah. Oh.
Anything else you would like to know?
No,
I think
that I think we're going to have to stop for today. You're going to have to tell whatever stories are left next time in the mini series of Nigh Pickles.
The limited series. Stacey, I want to thank you for having me back. Once again, it's not easy to get on your show.
No, it's not.
I hope that Glenn enjoys this episode, which is really, besides, your friends who you dedicated it to, I'd also like to throw in a shout out to Glenn Garfinkel, who really inspired me to come back on the show.
We're probably going to have to send him some pickles now. So
that's okay. I know how to do that.
Yeah. Thank you, dear, for coming on and being on my inaugural episode with Straw Hut Media. And thanks, everybody, for listening. And don't be a crumb, okay? Bye.
Bye.
Thanks for listening to my shit. I really appreciate it. Come back and hear more shit next time on the Shit That Happens to Me podcast. Do you think I've said shit enough for one podcast episode? Tune in next time to the Shit That Happens to Me podcast. You got it, baby!